Today's listener write-in comes from Penguin. Penguin sent in one message and then I asked her to provide a little more information. I've been daydreaming since COVID. It's become a habit and I wonder if you have advice on how I can stop for good. I tried to meditate every day, journal, get outside, and I made a habit tracker. I eventually fell off because stresses of everyday life. I also listened to subliminal affirmations. I think I preferred comfort in my daydreams because efforts to improve myself were taking a long time, like making new friends or getting better at hobbies, while daydreaming is instant. Meditation, also emotional release exercises like talking, journaling are some of the things I've tried that have helped. As for my triggers, they are movies, music, social media posts. Also, when I felt like I wanted something badly, I would daydream. I find I daydream a lot in between activities. Walking down the stairs to where I want to go, my mind just goes into daydreams. I think it's gotten addicting to me to have the feeling that I have everything I want without even trying in my daydreams. I daydream a lot about things I can't control, like fame, appearance, where I can live. Since I'm young, it's not escapism, I have a good family, it's more like location-wise, living somewhere more exciting. I also like to daydream where I can be effortlessly good at something, like acting, or face the reality that I'm not a professional and I need a lot of practice. I don't experience maladaptive daydreaming when I'm with my friends, classmates, when I'm driving, or playing an instrument. Sometimes when I'm with really close friends, I let my mind wander though. Mostly, even when I focus, the daydreams pop up here and there. I'm not diagnosed by any professionals with other underlying conditions, but I do experience above average anxiety, but I can always calm it down / face my fears. I'm also a perfectionist. Dear Penguin, thank you so much for writing in. Thank you for providing the extra details. I think the additional information paints a fuller scale of what you're dealing with when it comes to your maladaptive daydreaming. You have found some ways to mitigate the habit. Like any addictive habit, you have to be vigilant and work on maintaining it. It's kind of like exercise. I try to do yoga as much as I can, but last week I was feeling kind of tired, feeling kind of off, and instead of doing yoga multiple times during the week as I try to do, I ended up only doing yoga 1 day out of the 7, and then I felt super irritated as to why I was sleeping 10 hours a day and why I was eating foods I normally abstain from and why I felt even more tired and I didn't have energy to do things I enjoy as much. I was like, this sucks. But then when I did an actual assessment of how I was spending my time or not spending my time, it was kind of like, oh, well, you're not going to feel that great if you're not doing the things that generally lend toward you feeling better. One thing that may be beneficial to think about when it comes to maladaptive daydreaming or any kind of addiction is the habit loop that Charles Duhigg talks about in his book, The Power of Habit. I'll see if I can. Maybe I can put the illustration over the screen so you can see it. But he talks about the habit loop. Basically, with the habit loop, there's a cue, which in this case you could call a trigger. It's whatever is signifying the brain to launch into the routine. Once you launch into the routine, after receiving the cue, then at the end of the routine or at the end of the habit loop is that reward, which might be dopamine or some other kind of feel-good chemical or feel-good thing. Once you get that reward, the brain is like, oh great, this is how I know I can get this whenever I want it. So now whenever I see that cue or that trigger, I'm going to go into that routine to get that reward, and then it just becomes the habit loop or the habit cycle. It kind of reasserts itself. The more you do it, the more you kind of ingrain that habit loop. We can't really blame the brain for this. One of the elements of our bodies is that our mind wants us to get whatever we can get as fast as we can get it. That's why sugary foods or highly processed carbs are easier to reach for than, like, I don't know, sweet potatoes and protein. The body and the brain don't want to put that much effort into things, so unfortunately you're gonna have to be the commander of the brain ship and be like, no, we need to do this instead. One way of getting into hijacking your own kind of habit loop is to essentially identify the rewards of maladaptive daydreaming. What is your brain cued to to wanting to get. You talk about stress and specific desires like travel, fame, getting things easily like acting talent. So if you want to kind of hijack your own habit loop, there are some things you can do. Let's talk about for a moment, we'll go back to the habit loop. But for a moment, let's talk about the arrival fallacy. You talk about your daydreams allowing you to essentially achieve the sense of having already arrived at a state of success, whether that's fame, how you look, where you live. The thing about arrival fallacy that sometimes we can forget is that when you achieve something, it's not that exciting for that long. It's not like a long-lasting state of being. You might be really excited to get, I don't know, a dress or something, and then once you get it, the joy of it kind of wears off. But when you were thinking about getting the dress for a while, the kind of joy of that moment was kind of built up in your head. With you dreaming about these achievements, it becomes a kind of prolonged achievement fallacy because you're not actually arriving at any of these things. So you're not getting to the point in real reality when you'd be like, oh, fame isn't all it's cracked up to be. Oh, maybe it's not the best thing in the world to be in this nice looking place in my head. The reality differs often from what we picture in our heads. There's that annoying phrase people say where it's like, it's not about the destination, it's about the journey, blah, blah, blah. And unfortunately, sometimes annoying phrases have truth to them. Even though we might think our lives would be great if we were constantly at all these different achievement levels, being lauded with praise for whatever we do, that kind of life would probably get old and tired too. Some of the things that make life the most interesting is when we're challenged, when we grow, when we find ways of becoming different than we were. There's kind of excitement in the surprise. It's almost like Robert Frost has this phrase, no surprise for the writer, no surprise for the reader. And it's that sense of discovery. Even when you're a writer who's as professional as Robert Frost at that time, who, had written however many poems he had written the moment he said that, there was still that joy of discovery for him, and he could then share those discoveries to readers. They would be surprised as they read the surprises he found. Living in life versus daydreaming about living is about opening yourself up to the surprises. And not all of them are going to be fun. They won't be. But some are going to be super lovely. I was in Dublin last month and, I kind of pictured how my trip would go. I knew I was meeting an old friend there and I was excited about that. But one of the other joys that happened while I was there, I ended up meeting two poets just spontaneously as I was hopping about the city and as I was coming from a plane from London. So one of the poets I met first was a poet in his 70s. He had been a former Irish diplomat. He sat on the plane next to me coming from London to Dublin, and he was just a lovely man. We talked about Irish poets. He gave me all these recommendations for things I might not have gone to if we hadn't had the conversation, and it was super lovely. And then the second poet I met was in a big bookstore. We were both looking at Sylvia Plath books in this bookstore in Dublin, and we started talking about Sylvia Plath, and it was a super lovely conversation. If I had thought about, and I did think about my trip beforehand, but I didn't imagine I was going to meet just some lovely poets out and about, and it made for, just a little heartwarming moment in the trip. I guess I just want to emphasize that a bunch, that those kind of heartwarming moments or surprises or discoveries happen when you're living. Even though your daydreams may provide you with some sense of dopamine or false satisfaction or achievement fallacy, they're not going to lend toward a future. They're not going to lend toward growth. They're not going to lend toward you discovering more things about yourself in the real world. One of the things you talk about is acting, and you may find that if you put more energy into acting, that you might not even like it. And then your daydreams would change because of that. When you take steps toward the things that seem too hard to do, yes, it may be disappointing, disappointing, but it may also be really freeing, and it might clear the way for you to find other things that you're more interested in daydreaming about, but also more interested in actually doing. All that being said, there's pleasure in the unknown, and I hope you'll open yourself up to experiencing that pleasure, even if it's difficult or uncomfortable at times. Growth is one of the joys of being human. Discovering more about your world and yourself is one of the joys of being human. And you may also find that the characters you create in your head are actually kind of dull compared to the people you meet in real life. You may find some of the people in life are some of the coolest people you've ever met. People where you really feel that heart connection, that moment where you're like, oh, I'm not alone in this wild universe. There are people who resonate with me deeply. And it's such a lovely thing to be present with another human being and to be able to see someone as they are and for them to be able to see you as you are. There's a resonant joy that you don't get in your daydreams. No matter how good of a daydreamer you are or how creative you are, it's just not the same. That's all to say, everything may be really dull compared to your daydreams because they're exciting. So if you really want to curb this habit, I think one of the ways is to really start grounding yourself more in the present. Do yoga, go back to all the different mechanisms you were doing that were helpful before. Start finding joy in the small moments and excitement in the small moments. It doesn't have to be a big travel adventure somewhere or being a famous actor. See where you can find those small moments of connections with others or with the world around you. One way that people can increase their happiness is through elimination. If your triggers are movies, music, and social media, what would it be like to eliminate all of those for a whole month? What would it be like to eliminate one of those for a whole month? What would it be like to eliminate all of those for a week? That might be a great place to start. My guess would be that the first 24 to 48 hours would probably be really difficult. It would probably be really dull. Once you get over that dullness, I think you would start seeing more opportunities to connect in the real world. You might start practicing your musical instrument or other things or making more friends if you have nothing else to do. I think one of the kind of shames of modern life is that we have distractions around us all the time. It just doesn't stop. There's always something to do. And because of that, we kind of lack the joy of boredom. When we're bored, we get creative. When we're bored, we create things with our hands. We reach out to people. We do things. So defaulting to the mind only in those states of boredom, you're losing out on the other aspects. And it's funny because like the mind is kind of like an internal TV, right? If you're imagining all these things. So if you take away social media, if you take away music, and if you take away movies, which are all different forms of media, what happens? Maybe your brain gets a little quieter. Maybe it gets a little louder at first. Maybe you feel kind of depressed at first. But I think if you follow the habit cycle or the habit loop, you can start hijacking your habit loop again. So I would say eliminate those things. Try at least for a week. If you can go longer, great, go longer. By eliminating those things, hopefully that will decrease the amount of cues or triggers you're getting to go into that maladaptive habit loop. I know you did mention other moments where you were maladaptive daydreaming outside of those. That's okay. We're not aiming for perfection here. We're just aiming to get you at a level where you're feeling happier and more satisfied with your living life. If your habit loop is cueing you to a routine that's getting you dopamine, then one way of doing this is when you're cued in. So this could even be if you're still watching movies, music, or social media. But if you feel that inclination to maladaptive daydream, instead of doing that, go for a run or exercise or meditate or do something else that can get the reward of the dopamine. It probably would be easier if you didn't have those triggers. So I would recommend eliminating those as best as you can, and I think you'll see better success. And if you're serious for being on the road to success, do it. You can do it. And I think you'll be surprised how your month might be different from the day-to-day life you've been living. Finally, my suggestions are to also return to the things you outlined that were proving successful before you got tired and stressed out. So you listed daily meditation, journaling, getting outside, using a habit tracker, affirmations, meditation, emotional release exercises, and talking. I think I would add maybe practicing more patience and mindfulness within those. I think meditation can lend toward those, and try to be okay with being on the journey. I know it can be boring, but there are surprises along the way if you stick with it. The fact is that we're all on our own journeys in life, and trust me when I say so many of us would wish to rush through to that achievement level. But again, it's that achievement fallacy. Once we get to where we think we want to be, we find that's not as golden hued as we first thought. It takes time and failure and practice to really flourish in your skills. And you didn't really go into your musical instrument playing, but I hope that's one of the places where you find that you're more present and you find more joy when you're playing. For many years, there was hype around Malcolm Gladwell's 10,000 hours thing. That was where he said, if you practice something for 10,000 hours, you'll become an expert. That's not quite that's not quite a scientific assessment, but surely if you practice something 10 hours or 20 hours, you're probably going to improve from the first point to the second. So I think if you do really want to be an actress, maybe start putting more time into that. Maybe you'll find you don't like it as much as you thought. Maybe you'll find you like it even more than you thought. The more focused time you have to dedicate to something, the more you're able to give yourself the opportunity to flourish. Even with my videos on my channel or my thumbnails, you can see from like 2 years ago when I started posting these videos and now my editing has slightly improved. Not by a ton, but by a little bit, and a little bit can make a difference. I hope all of this was helpful, and I really appreciate you writing in with follow-up answers to the questions I had. I know you can put this habit to rest. It will take some time, and I hope you'll give yourself that time and that you'll allow yourself to be vigilant. It's easy to backslide on habits. Like last week for me, when I wasn't doing yoga as much, I was being lazy and sleeping in. It sucked having a week like that, especially from one perfectionist to another. Like, I understand completely so much where you're coming from. Doing things makes a difference. Showing up for yourself makes a difference. Showing up on the yoga mat makes a difference. So I hope you'll do that with the different mechanisms you found that have been helpful of mitigating this habit. And I hope you see great success in your music or your friendships, wherever you put your time and your heart and your attention to. I'm hoping to do a video on perfectionism at some point, and an emotional freedom tapping video for perfectionism as well. I think it's one of those themes that have come up a lot with the maladaptive daydreaming. So stay tuned for that. Everyone else, please like, subscribe, hit that bell for notifications. If you would like to join my Patreon, I post well-being tips, book recommendations of the month, journal exercises, and an early release video every month. I would love your support over there, link below. Also, if you would like to write in with your own listener write-in, I would love to answer your query, so you can also find that link below. Take care, y'all. Be well.